Hey guys, it's Kevin down the Murphy guys, and this this is probably going to be the last Oscar-type movie that I do end up reviewing for you guys. It's a film I've wanted to see for a long time now, and finally it has come to my area, and that is none other than Paul Thomas Anderson's new film, Phantom Thread. And what Phantom Thread is essentially about is we center on Reynolds Woodcock, and he is a very dedicated fashion designer. He has a very specific way of doing things, and women to him are essentially chess pieces. They just kind of come and go in his life. That is until he meets Alma. This girl, Alma, is a waitress, and he kind of takes her under his wing. She kind of becomes his muse, and she has a very different way of looking through life, and the rest of the film is basically an exploration of can their relationship work, can he actually substitute his work for genuine love, and if so, what are the sort of repercussions of making that decision, but that's really all I'm going to say. So, Phantom Thread in general, I was honestly hyped for this movie. I mean, there were two things right off the bat. Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Thomas Anderson. You say those, two names to me, and automatically I'm hooked. Daniel Day-Lewis, one of the greatest actors of our generation. I have never seen this guy not give it 100%. Even in movies I don't like Gangs of New York, he still absolutely kills it in, and it amazes me, what he's able to do. But Paul Thomas Anderson as well, an extremely underrated director that I really don't think gets enough attention. Sure, his films, people have really gone out and, seen, but they're not talked about as much as I think they really should be, and, he definitely is a fantastic director in basically every sense of the word. But that in general had me very hyped for this movie. The plot as well, I thought looked really different and out there, and I really did not know how this movie was going to be. And I have to say, while this film isn't as masterful as some of PTA's other work, it still is a damn good film. This is a fantastic movie that I definitely really enjoyed. It's very different than I expected it to be, but absolutely is worth checking out for sure. And there are many things that really do go with that, and we're going to start off with the cast. Now, right off the bat, that is definitely one of the best things about this film. I think from top to bottom, this film is very well casted. Let's first talk about Daniel Day-Lewis, because to say this guy is a great actor would be a pretty big understatement. He is probably one of the biggest revolutionaries of any generation, honestly, the way he is able to completely put himself into that character, and the fact that he doesn't have a specific style really says a lot about him as an actor. And once again, this character, Reynolds Woodcock, he completely transforms himself into, and he really does a great job here, because Reynolds is a different character from what you've seen in some of Day-Lewis's other performances. Sure, this character does have that commanding presence. I mean, the character he's playing is very meticulous, and he wants things a certain way. And I don't just mean with fashion. This is a guy who, if you chew your food a certain way, or if you pour something a certain way, or if you make a noise that he really doesn't like, this guy is just so authoritative about it, and you can just tell it really, irks him in that way. It really grinds his gears, and, that's something I definitely really did like about his performance, but it is much more subdued and understated than I think some of his other performances have been, and I honestly really did like that. I like that this wasn't a big, boisterous performance. I mean, sure, there definitely are some pretty big scenes, but it's not in the way you would expect, and I think that's really what makes this performance that much more impressive. He absolutely killed it here, as he usually does, and once again shows why he is one of the greatest actors of, like I said, not just of this generation, but of any generation. And if this really is his final film, it was definitely a bold way to go out. Am I upset? Yeah, because I'm definitely going to miss him for sure. I don't know if it is his final film, but if it is, this was definitely a great way to close out an incredible career for, again, one of the best actors I've ever seen. However, surprisingly, as good as Daniel Day-Lewis is, he's not the standout here. The standout, without a doubt, is Vicky Krieps, not 100% sure how to pronounce her last name, but she absolutely kills it here as the character of Alma, because Alma starts off the film, and she's very insecure. There's a lot of things about her that she really isn't happy with. You know, something as simple as just her chest not being as big as she wants it to be, or her hips not being as wide as she wants it to be, and the way that, you know, Reynolds kind of changes her as a person is pretty big, and she goes through a pretty big transformation in the film. I really did love where they took her character. She also has this really dark side to her that I really don't want to get into, but she definitely did a fantastic job here. The chemistry between these two is very interesting. It's very on and off throughout the film. There are points where these two are very much in love, and then there are other points where they're at their absolute worst, and they're really irritating each other. And I thought these two had fantastic chemistry. They just worked so well together. I loved getting into their overall relationship. I thought they did a fantastic job, and definitely they carry this film very well. And then the only other performance to talk about, because really the only other character of this movie, is Lesley Manville as Reynolds' sister, Sorrel, who I also really did like. Sorrel's character, once again, her and Reynolds have a very interesting relationship. They do have a lot that they've been through together, and I really did like where she went throughout the film. She definitely had a lot of really fun lines, and I thought they did a lot of great stuff with her, and once again, she also did a fantastic job here. So now let's get to the directing and the writing, because similar to Daniel Day-Lewis, that was definitely one of the, I think, intrigues of this film. Paul Thomas Anderson, in my opinion, is a very, not underrated, because, you know, definitely people who, you know, praise him, they really do praise him, but I feel like he's not as praised as he should be. He's made some fantastic films, and Phantom Thread really does recapture a lot of the same tones that his other films do have. It feels very dark, it's very suspenseful at points, you know, there's this sense where, you know, you don't really know what's gonna happen, but it's definitely a much different kind of tone than some of his other films have. It's a lot more out there and weird, but it also has a decent amount of comedy. And when I mean that, I don't just mean a few scenes. No, there's pretty much comedy throughout this entire film, and I was definitely very surprised at that, but honestly, I think it worked really well. I think it works, especially, you know, Reynolds, who has very specific ways of doing things, and pretty much everything he does, he has, you know, specific sort of routines, and I mean that with everything. I mean, there are scenes in this movie where he ridicules Alma for chewing her food a certain way, and he calls her out for it, and he, you can tell, is generally detested, or the way that she'll add too much butter to food, or something as simple as, you know, just everyday things. And again, this is stuff that does sound ridiculous, but the film really does play it up for laughs, and that's something I definitely really did enjoy. I thought it really did heighten my enjoyment of the film overall. You know, it helped that the film didn't take itself too seriously in that regard. It obviously shows, you know, how obsessive, you know, Reynolds can really be with this stuff, but again, it didn't really feel like the comedy was kind of lessening the impact of this film. You know, I definitely did feel the full-on impact, and I think that was definitely very well done here. Now let's get to the writing, though, because I really want to talk about the writing here. The writing is among some of the best of the entire year, and here's the thing. I can understand the complaint if someone says that, oh, this movie's boring, not much happens, because, yeah, from a story standpoint, this movie kind of doesn't give you the basic three-act structure. In fact, it outright refuses to do so. Like I said in the plot synopsis, this movie is essentially just an exploration of these two, you know, characters' romance, and how it blossoms, you know, where it really does go throughout the film, and I think it was honestly very well handled in that regard, and it's a very compelling story. I mean, there are, you know, that's not to say that nothing happens in this film, because I do think there are significant things that happen, but it's a lot more subtle and a lot more, you know, minimal than it would be in a, you know, bigger film. And, you know, again, it's not a very plot-driven film in that way. It's much more focused on the characters, and that's something I really did love. The connection that Reynolds and Alma do have is a very twisted one. There are points in this movie where they are absolutely screaming at each other, and you can tell they have such clashing ideals, but then there are those points where you can see their undying love for each other and why they have this connection, and you go back and forth through their relationship. There are points where you're like, oh, they should be together, but then there's something that happens where you're like, oh, no, they definitely shouldn't be together, but then you realize they should be, and I really did love the way the movie got into their relationship. I thought it was honestly very well handled there, but the film also has a lot to say about the idea of, you know, someone who is a perfectionist, because that is very much what Reynolds is. He's someone who, you know, again, he has certain ways of doing things, and if things aren't done in this way, you can tell he winces a bit. And again, the movie does play a lot of this stuff up for laughs, but you do definitely get a pretty good idea of what Reynolds' character has gone through, and I think, you know, they did a very good job of getting into his head, showing the creator that he is, you know, showing how, again, he has everything, he wants everything to be in a certain place and in a certain way, and I think that was definitely very well done. And the film is definitely, also, you know, again, the comedy, the film is definitely a lot weirder than I expect it to be. I mean, without spoiling anything, this film goes into some pretty fucked up directions, especially when it comes to the third act of this film, but it never felt like it came out of left field. It actually does make sense. They set something up throughout the film, and there are all these seeds planted, and at the end it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And where the film really does take these two characters is honestly really ballsy. And I love that the film did that. I always say, you know, you start something, you have to carry it out, and you have to see it done, and that's what this film does. It sticks the landing. It goes with, you know, it shows you this really crazy idea, and it 100% commits to it, and honestly, I really loved it. It's very different from other things I've seen. Again, it really adds to the twisted side of this story, and that's something I very much did enjoy here. I thought that was definitely very well handled overall. I thought, again, where the film goes, it's crazy, and they did a very good job with that. But also what the film has to say about fashion in general and various fashion designers. I mean, again, fashion is not something that I particularly take an interest in, but watching this film, you know, hearing some of Reynolds' ideals and things he does as a fashion designer, yeah, you do see a lot of what a fashion designer does have to go through, and it is similar to, I think, Versace in that way, where how Versace, you know, he is this very respected fashion designer, but the difference is Reynolds is a lot more, less insecure. He has this, like I said, this very bad OCD, and it very much does overtake him, and again, you really do see that throughout the film, and again, all that stuff is very well handled, and in a film that is this well constructed, it is kind of hard to pick out a flaw, because again, it is a very well presented film. However, if I did have to have one problem in the movie, I will say, as much as I did enjoy Lesley Manville, because trust me, she is absolutely fantastic here. She's really funny. She has some really great scenes with both Krieps and Day-Lewis. They all have great chemistry together. I didn't really care about her on a personal level in the way I did Reynolds or Alma, and in a film where it's so focused on heavily fleshing out these two characters and the way that they really do change each other, I just felt that Sorrell kind of paled in comparison. Her character just feels a little bit underwritten. I did not feel as connected to her as I wanted to be. And I do feel they could have maybe done a little bit more with their overall background. Maybe get more into what they've gone through. Just get me to connect with her just a little bit. Because at the end of the day, as much as I did enjoy Lesley Manville, she's not particularly something that is going to stick with me through this film. I think what's going to stick with me is Daniel Day-Lewis and, you know, and Vicky Krieps and their relationship. And some scenes with Lesley Manville will, but again, her character is just not something that I think is really going to stick with me. And I do think they could have done just a little bit more with her. But other than that, I can't really think of too many complaints that I did have with the film. Also, the cinematography here is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of those films that is just it's great to look at. It's got this real, I mean, of course, it does take place in the fashion world, so it's obviously gorgeous to look at, and they did a very good job with that. Just, shots of Reynolds making these beautiful dresses and making these beautiful creations. This is very well done. I really did love the way that was handled. I thought the cinematography was honestly some of the best I've seen all year. The score in this movie is very specific because there are a lot of scores that I really did love throughout 2017, but nothing as, I think, as sort of inclusive as this one really is, because without spoiling anything, the score is so prominent in this movie that it almost becomes its own character. There aren't many scenes that go by where you don't hear this score, and Jonny Greenwood, I know he's done many Paul Thomas Anderson score before, but I think he's constructed his best score here. I mean, just the main medley and just the main melody in general, it's so eerie and atmospheric, and it feels so devastating. It perfectly puts you in the moment, and I really love everything about the score. It's easily one of my favorite scores of last year for sure, and definitely something that I'm going to be listening to for a very long time. The score is absolutely excellent here, and I really did love it. And then the editing to this movie, I will admit there maybe were a couple times in the second act where the pacing did drag just a little bit. It wasn't boring, it was just a little bit slow. There were some scenes here and there, but other than that, guys, like I said, I really can't find too many issues I have with this film. It's very well constructed, it's very different. It's a film I don't really want to say too much about. It's a lot funnier than I expected to be. It's a very endearing look at this very twisted romance. It's got some great performances from Daniel Day-Lewis and Vicky Krieps. It's a very good way for Daniel Day-Lewis to go out if, like I said, this is his final film. It's really everything I could have asked for in a Paul Thomas Anderson film overall. It definitely would have been on my top 20 list had I had seen this, before the year end. It definitely would have made that list for sure. And I am definitely going to give Phantom Thread overall an A. So overall, guys, my review of Phantom Thread. The most guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts on it. Like I said, I'd love to talk more about it, but really, this is a film that I went into not really knowing too much about, and I kind of want you guys to do the same, because I think the directions this film goes is really going to surprise you. And for some, it might not work, but for me, it worked really well. I thought, like I said, Anderson had a very clear vision of what he wanted to do, and he stuck with it, and I was overall very impressed. I really did love the way it did turn out. But that's in my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.